Hello everyone. So in this last video, I'll talk very briefly about Hegel's concept of history. And briefly because this is what we're going to be discussing in our live session, so I don't want to spend too much time in this pre-recorded video because eventually philosophy is dialectical, of course, so we need dialogue, and this one-way route is not really working really well. But anyway, so to talk about history. Now, first of all, apart from Hegel, let's just think of what do we mean by history? What is history? Now, the way we understand history is usually twofold. So we understand it as the course of human events. History is happening throughout. It's our past. It's our past. Our future, which will be a past, is also history. So it's a course of human events, but it's also a particular narration, a particular narrative of events that forms the understanding of the people, of a people, like for example, of the current time. We talk about our history, the history of the world, the history of our country, the history of art, the history of science, right? So it's a particular narrative, it's a story. So historia, actually the word in English, contains the idea of story, but also in German, in fact, the word is Geschichte, which means story, but it also is related to the word geschehen, which is happening, right? Things that are happening. So it's a course of human events, but it's also Geschichte, which is the narrative, the story of the things that are happening, right? And with Hegel, it is good to keep these two significances in our mind. So what is history for Hegel? Now, we can have different kinds of understanding of history. One of them, which is close to me, is that history could be understood as just a series of random contingent events. We've talked about this with Rousseau, right? And that we connect with a narrative. And this narrative, it's relative, right? Whoever creates it creates a narrative of history. So it's a series of random and contingent events, not necessarily connected to each other, but which historians try to connect with some kind of a story and some kind of agenda, right? That's one way of looking at it. Or we go with Hegel and we believe that history is not a series of random and contingent and unintelligible events, but they follow an intelligible pattern. They have an order, right? An inherent order to them that is that order that might not be clear while it is happening, but it will be revealed in time. History is what will have been and what has been, but intelligibly, right? And it follows something called reason. Right? There is something called reason in history. It follows a reasonable structure. It has an idea, and this idea, if you remember, we have talked about it quite a lot in the last few videos, is actuality, right? It is what is real, what is actual, and in that sense, what is present. In fact, famous from Hegel, which people quote all the time, what is real is rational, what is rational is real, and that's exactly it. What is idea or actuality or rationality, what is real or actual is rational, and what is rational is real or actual, and that is the course of history. That the actuality that we have right now, it has followed a rational pattern, and it is rational. There is a purpose to it. In fact, it is the idea inside the rationality of it is a kind of world spirit, as Hegel would call it, which follows what he calls the cunning of reason. And what is the cunning of reason? Why is it cunning? Is because at present, right, when I'm doing anything, when we are acting, and not me, like let's say we are talking about world historical individuals, so he was talking about Napoleon, we could talk about Joan of Arc, whoever, the world historical individuals, they are acting at that time without having a full understanding of the consequences of their action and of how it plays a part in history, but it does eventually play a part in history, right? And so history progresses via this cunning of reason, and so reason sort of trumps all, and it makes history progress in the course that it wants to, and everybody else is just a player, just a pawn in this cunning of history. So this is one of the views we can have of history out here, right? What Hegel would say that history is a progressive achievement of human sort of spirit, of human consciousness or idea. This is the self-consciousness that we have talked about earlier as well, to realize this freedom that we were talking about as self-determination. So we get more and more self-determined. And how does this self-determination happen? It happens through our own actualization of our freedom, of our own understanding of it, of our own grasping of it in its entelecheia and its energeia, right? And so our realization that what we are right now is what we as humans have chosen to be. You know, our laws are ours, we have made them, right? And so, you know, to become one with our institution, with our law, with our state, and if we are not one with it, then I suppose to change it, you know, that would be the left Hegelian take to it. So to understand actually, you know, to understand precisely this, that what is real is rational and what is rational is real, you know, that is the whole point of history, the progress of history, the telos of history, right? It is going towards the rationality of the real, right? That is the telos of history. So in that sense, it is a temporal progress of the spirit that in the beginning we talked about as an alien baby in this world with, you know, hardly any consciousness. As it progresses in consciousness and then encounters other humans and forms this connection of wills, and then forms greater and greater connection of wills and forms societies and states and systems of law to have these societies in harmony, so politics, right? And eventually reaches what we could call the absolute idea, or some, you know, the total sort of world historical spirit is the progress of history, of the consciousness through time, right? So we have gone actually from this alien baby, this unconscious, almost unconscious perception, you know, to complete awareness and actualization of our self-determination as subjects of history and not objects of history, right? So to move towards this complete subjectivity in some sense of history. And so I think Jean Hippolyte calls Hegel's phenomenology of spirit a Bildungsroman, and in fact Hegel's phenomenology of spirit, you know, traces this whole story of spirit, you know, its phenomenology, appearances, phenomena is to appear, appearance, sorry. Finine is to appear. So it is the idea of the appearance of spirit as, you know, from this mere unconscious, almost unconscious alien baby to, you know, the full reason, right? You know, the state as reason, as the rationality of the real reality of the rational, actually. So that's in fact the full idea. In fact, when we're talking about this this reason or this spirit, that spirit is the same as what we were talking about earlier with idea, the Platonic Aristotelian idea, is the same as this what we were talking about as actuality, as opposed to potentiality, and the completeness of understanding and of eventually of freedom as self-determination. So this is the course of history, and so that's why I said I'll make a short video of it, because we will talk about the text that we have. And it gets actualized in the law, in the state, in the institutions, and this is the movement forward. So is there an end to this history? So this is what people have been arguing about, you know, recently quite a lot. So you have that we mentioned, you know, the unnameable Fukuyama, who talks about this end of history, which was complete nonsense, right? So the idea is that we have achieved full freedom, and so, you know, we have reached the end of history. Anyone talking in 2021 about America is not going to see Fukuyama's vision sort of appearing, but I would rather go with the vision, the Marxist vision, or rather even the vision of the critical theory sort of school, which sees it as open-ended, you know, like I mean, one way of looking at it could be a very sort of, right-wing take on this whole thing of like, let's become one with the institutions that they have been created and they are right, and us questioning them is what is causing all these problems. Or you could go and say, well, we created these laws, or somebody created it, and they were not fully rational then. And I think, with quite a few of the laws that we have around us and quite a few of the rules that we have, I think one of the good things about history is that we are learning how little rationality some of them seem to have. And so if you're going to go by Hegel's vision, I'm not saying we all should become Hegelian, but to get them to a greater degree of rationality, to get them to talk for the general will rather than to talk for, the will of factions, if you're using Rousseau's terms, could be the goal of the people acting right now in history. And maybe we are being enacted by the cunning of reason, but that doesn't mean that, we are not self-determined. And that doesn't mean that we are not autonomous. And I think that's the thing that I can take from Hegel. And the most important thing I can take from Hegel is actually his concept of freedom. And actually his concept of freedom as this concrete, embedded self-determination in this particular moment of history, in its entelecheia and its energeia, right, at this point, which would lead me to reach my eudaimonia. Sorry, I'm using all these Aristotelian terms, and I'm not an Aristotelian by any means, but perhaps, this is what we can get from Hegel. And so let's discuss it in our session, in our classroom discussion session, and then next week we will go to the coolest and the best follower, Marx. Thank you.